And welcome to this first video on the effects of institutionalisation. I just want to clarify a couple of things before we get going with the content. I've created this video for both year groups. Year 12s, you've already been set some of these tasks as DIL in the last couple of weeks. So this is completing the material on the effects of institutionalisation, ensuring that your booklets are complete and marking up any exam practice that you've done in the area. Year 13s, I thought it would be useful for you to redo some of this material as part of your revision for paper 1. So obviously you might not have the booklets in front of you, so I would advise that you do carefully fill in any summary sheets. You could create your own summary notes or mind maps. Alternatively, you could use this material to be creating one of the 16-mark essay plans. But both year groups will be using the same content, just in different ways. The other thing that I just wanted to state before we get going is I knew that I was going to be out of college today, so therefore I decided to create these video lessons for you to give you hopefully the same experience as what you would get if I was in front of you in the lesson. Therefore, because I've made these video lessons, I would like you to submit this work at the end of the lesson. For year 12s, the assignment closes at 12:15 this afternoon, and I am expecting you to have handed in all of the work to a very high standard, as you would have done had I been in front of you. Like I say, I've gone to the effort of trying to make it so that you're not missing out and you've got essentially a lesson. So please, if you can hand that work in, that would be super, and then we don't get behind, and we'll be back on track for tomorrow when I actually do return back to work. So yeah, this is for year 12s, this is pages 37 to 41 in your booklets. If you have already added stuff into your booklets but it's not very detailed or you're missing stuff, can you please ensure that that is also completed for tomorrow? I really don't want to be behind tomorrow when we come back, so please do make sure that you complete this to a high standard. I don't want to be out of college today, but unfortunately I've got appointments that I've got to attend, and they do keep landing on a Tuesday, so there's nothing I can do really about that. So just make sure that you do complete the work as best as what you can. Okay, so if you could get in front of you, please, the summary sheets that you've been provided with by the substitute teacher. And what you'll see in the centre of this sheet is that this is basically a plan of how you would go about creating the AO1 content for the following question. So this is discuss research into the effects of institutionalisation for 16 marks. As I've just said, all this material is only AO1. We'll look at the AO3 in a short while. But I do just want to start by getting you to underline the word research, and for you to all be aware that the word research in this context, and also in a lot of other questions, doesn't necessarily just mean studies. In psychology, the word research can mean theories and or studies. So you just want to make a note of that, because for a lot of students, they might not be able to recall fine details of a research study. So therefore, you would get credit for any kind of theoretical ideas about the effects of institutionalisation. And like I said, that goes for all other times the word research is used in a 16-mark question. So research means theories and or studies. So whilst we're on that, if you see in the top left-hand corner, even though the question says discuss research, you would actually get credit for defining institutionalisation. Nothing to do with the study, but you are still getting credit for that theoretical knowledge. So what is institutionalisation? If we go ahead and pop that into the top left hand corner, you can see on the screen it is the effects, usually on a child's development, of being placed into care provided by orphanages and residential care homes. The second bit is non-essential, but it's just telling you a bit of background as to where Bowlby's children typically came from. So go ahead and pop that into the top left hand corner. Also, please be aware that you could, as with most definitions, you could also get this as a 2-mark question. All right, so define what is meant by institutionalisation. So the study that we're going to be focusing on specifically to begin with in this area is the Rutter study from 2011 that was concerned with orphanage care, predominantly Romanian orphans, rather, who had been placed into some horrific circumstances, some horrifically poor standards of orphanages for the early years of their life. So we're going to be taking a look at Rutter's method in a moment. I do just want to point out to you, you can see that I've highlighted it in blue here anyway. You could get questions about methodologies similar to the Rutter study all the way through your papers. So it might not necessarily just appear on paper 2, where you have got your standalone research methods section. You could get a big long chunk of questions to do with methodology on paper 1, 2 or 3. So it is important when we give you these key studies that you understand the methodologies that have been used and that you can also confidently evaluate them, and then some of that knowledge would spill out into research methods questions, not just questions on institutionalisation. So just be mindful of that. So what we want to talk about here then is the methodology put in place by the Rutter study in 2011. Like I say, fill in the summaries as we're going through, but also make your booklets kind of match up with this. So Rutter followed a group of 165 Romanian orphans. As I've already referenced, they were placed into quite poor quality orphanages for the first few years of their life. They were later adopted into Britain, and Rutter wanted to test whether or not the experience of being in those orphanages, in those institutions, would have a long-term effect on what we call their physical, cognitive and emotional development. Please do get used to using those 3 headings, because when we're talking about the experiences of institutional care, we normally refer to those 3 categories of effect: physical, cognitive and emotional development. And as I just said there, it's not actually on the screen at the moment. This was to investigate whether early experiences in institutions had an impact on long-term development. So Rutter said that they were tracking long-term development by following these students up to and including the age of 15. You can see at the bottom that they assessed the children at a variety of different ages, so at 4, 6, 11 and then latterly at the age 15. What you also need to know is that a group of 15 English children acted as a control. So there were significantly fewer of them, so 165 Romanian orphans compared to a control of 15 English children. But whilst the English children hadn't been through the experience of the institutions, they had gone through the adoption process, so they acted like a valid control. Okay, so that's the methodology. Just to clarify as well, if you want to add it on, this is an example of a longitudinal study. And one advantage of a longitudinal study, in comparison to what we call snapshot studies like Bowlby, is that they allow us to track development over time, okay? And we don't just get a window into what the children are like at that one point, okay? So if you want to just add that on. So we need to now take a look at the findings from the Rutter study. So I've tried to make these findings quite general to begin with, and then we've also got some additional numerical findings in relation to IQ in a moment. So around about half of the Romanian adoptees, when they arrived in Britain, showed signs of mental retardation. All that means is it's a measure of IQ, and unfortunately these children were in the lowest 2 standard deviations of IQ in a normal population. So they were showing signs of retardation. Also, they were quite undernourished. You could add this on if you wanted to. That is known as developmental dwarfism, meaning that they hadn't fully formed, so they're quite small and petite in stature, and they were significantly undernourished. By the age of 11 is where we start to see the differential rates of recovery, i.e. depending on when the child was adopted, that started to have an impact in terms of whether they could go beyond their means, i.e. and change their development. So that's all we mean by differential rates of recovery. And those differential rates of recovery started to become clear and obvious by the time the child got to the age of 11. You could see who had been adopted early and who had been adopted later. So, for those children who were adopted after the 6-month period, the ones who had spent longer periods of time within the institutions, they showed unusual attachment behaviour. Now, in the Rutter study, we normally talk about disinhibited attachment. There is a second type of attachment called reactive attachment, which I'll speak about in a moment, but predominantly we see disinhibited attachments, which is basically where they don't have any fear of strangers, so inappropriate behaviours towards strangers a lot of the time. So they become quite attention seeking and quite clingy. Their social behaviours are unusual, so they'll cling to them, but then when they try to leave, they'll throw temper tantrums. Also, their social and affectionate behaviours are used indiscriminately towards anyone, so it's not necessarily to people who they're familiar with, it can be to strangers as well. And we make the comparison that those children who were adopted before the age of 6 months, they tend not to show that behaviour. Okay, so you've got a nice clear comparison there. So these are the additional findings. Obviously, for those of you who struggle to learn your numbers, because I've given you a lot of numbers recently, you may want to just stick to the more general findings. But if you can manage the numbers, then please do include this. So you can see these differential rates of recovery that I was speaking about before. If the child was taken out of institutional care before the age of 6 months, their IQ was typically healthy and what we would say as being in the normal population. Between 6 months to 2 years, it dips down quite significantly, so it falls to 86. And unfortunately, those children adopted after the age of 2 years had an IQ of 77 on average. There were reports of some of the 165 having IQs as low as the mid-60s, so therefore they are really at that low end of the distribution curve. So that's your additional numerical findings there for Rutter. Now, all of this material would be used in the following question. You may want to add this to the top of your page or in separate notes or into your booklet, whatever. So the key question would be, outline what research has shown about the effects of institutionalisation, and that would typically attract between 5 and 6 marks. Now, you should already know that the question does not require any procedural detail because it's all about the findings. So it's entirely up to you whether or not you want to go for the generic findings from the Rutter study, or if you want to build on it with your IQ numerical values, or you could include what I've put in the top right hand corner, which is what the findings imply about the major effects of institutionalisation. So you could go into a little bit more detail here about the attachment disorders that we see. So you can see at the bottom that you've got disinhibited, but we do also have the reactive attachment style. So this is where the child does the opposite to a disinhibited attachment style. They become really, really shy and anxious, and they become actually withdrawn from everyone, and they're not able to cope in any sort of social situations where they're confronted with people that they don't know, for example. So we've got 2 different kinds of attachment disorders that you could talk generally about in this style of question. So that's all the material that you could include in that type of question. You could also obviously refer to the second study, which we're going to review in a moment, by Chigani. And lastly, the other thing that you could talk about, so please take a note of it now, is you could at the end of your answer say that the study by Rutter implies that the effects of institutionalisation can be overcome as long as the intervention is early enough, i.e. before the age of 6 months, and that there's supportive care from parents. So that's always a good point to make, and I don't actually think that's in your booklet. It's not clear and obvious, so either add it into your booklet now, or for year 13s, make a note of that key question there. I just want everybody to be aware that you can make that statement at the end of that style of question, and it's a perfectly valid thing to say, even though it's not a clear and obvious finding. You are saying or giving an interpretation of what the findings suggest. Okay. So that's how we would go about answering that key question purely with the Rutter study. But we do now need to consider that there is a secondary piece of research by Chigani, which was a series of PET scans that were completed on 10 orphans to basically compare and contrast a control brain to that of a child who's been reared in the institutional process. So this was PET scans to look at which areas of the brain were malformed and not performing at normal levels. And what you can see in the Chigani study is that brain activity was decreased across virtually the entire cerebrum, virtually the entire cortex, but there was significantly decreased activity in three key regions, and they're highlighted on your summary. So we've got the PFC, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. Now, in passing, I have taught you about all of these three brain regions. So if you can just be having a think about what you think you already know about the prefrontal cortex, a case study to refer back to help you there would be the case of Phineas Gage. So does anything kind of pop into your memory, anything pop into your mind as to what the PFC is responsible for? Okay, so the case study of Phineas Gage demonstrated to us that the PFC is involved in giving us appropriate emotional responses. So there's always this famous quote that after his injury, Phineas Gage was no longer Phineas. He was quite hostile, he was quite hot-tempered, he didn't have appropriate social responses towards his colleagues, towards his wife, towards his children, and so on and so forth. So when you've got decreased activity in the PFC, you have inappropriate emotional responses. So if we wanted to attach that to the children in the Chigani study, and you want to add this onto your summary sheet, they will show inappropriate emotional responses. So that could be used to kind of build on the notion of the disinhibited attachments, i.e. they're really inappropriate with strangers, so they don't have any fear of them. They should be cautious around strangers, but they're not. It's an inappropriate social response for that situation. And then the whole kind of clinging to them and having tantrums when they leave, that would also factor in to the prefrontal cortex. Moving down to the amygdala, the year 13s, you've been taught in detail about the amygdala. I'm hoping it comes straight to your memory which topic area it is that I've taught you about the amygdala. But the amygdala is involved in aggressive behaviour, and when we don't have an amygdala which is functioning normally, for want of a better word, we may struggle with impulse control. The year 13s will usually know, or usually have been taught, that this is because they don't have enough serotonin in the amygdala. But when you don't have the amygdala functioning in a normal way, you can't control your impulsive actions. So therefore you become quite short-tempered. You lose your temper quite a lot. So for the children in the institution, it's again to do with this idea that they can often throw temper tantrums when they're not we're in a social situation where they're able to cling to an attachment figure. So they got less impulse control. And finally, the hippocampus, again, thinking back to case studies that we've looked at. Case of Clive Wearing, if you recall, his amnesia stemmed in the hippocampus and it wiped out virtually all of his long-term memory. So he was only left with a lot of procedural stuff. He didn't really have much semantic and nothing really episodic to speak of at all. So the hippocampus is involved in long-term memory. So how does that relate to the children in the institutions? What that means is that they can develop memories of how to behave normally with attachment figures, but also it impacts on their IQ, because obviously a lot of intelligence is memory based. So that might be why we've got significantly lower levels of IQ in these children, especially those that were kept in there for a significant period of time. So that's a review of both of your core studies for the effects of institutionalisation. On the right hand side, you would also get the opportunity to talk about the different categories of effect. So they are split into three, as I referred to at the start of the lesson. Hopefully you can remember what they are. So we've got physical, cognitive and emotional. What I'd like you to do, please, is read the definitions of what those different categories of effects are, and then summarise the description of the findings from the two studies that we've got here on the screen, and just make sure that you have got crystal clear a finding for each of the physical, cognitive and emotional effects. So pause this video here, please, and take a moment to do that. Okay, so now that we've reviewed that, I'd like you to turn that sheet over, put it to one side, and there's just a very, very quick quiz that we're going to run through. If you wanted to jot your answers down on a scrap piece of paper, that's absolutely fine, or you could do it on a board if you wanted to. So, name the two key studies in institutionalisation. This should be nice and fast. So the correct answers were Rutter and Chigani. Institutionalisation is defined as... So that should have been option 3, the care provided by orphanages and residential care homes. Also, just to clarify, remember that could be a 2-mark question. What was the aim of Rutter's research? And again, should be nice and quick, to assess the long-term effects of early institutionalisation. What type of study is this if it assesses the effects over long term? And hopefully you've got longitudinal springing into your mind there as well. What does the following number relate to? Okay, so that was one of the IQs, and this is the IQ of the children who had stayed in the Romanian orphanage after the age of 2 years. Were the Romanian orphans' IQs higher or lower if they were adopted before the age of 2? Do you know any of those numbers? So the answer is higher. Okay, so do you know those additional numbers? Okay, spot the errors. Okay, so we've got 3 errors in total, 2 in this first statement. Did you pick up on them? First one, they were not MRI scans. Do you know what kind of scans they were? And there was not 100 of them. There was only 10. Okay, so PET scans of 10 adopted Romanian orphans. Bottom statement, there was only 1 error in here, and it was this one here. The brain activity was not increased, it was significantly decreased in those regions. What is the type of attachment that children show after being raised in Romanian orphanages for after 6-month period? Should be option B, nice and quickly there, disinhibited attachment. Which of the following statements is true? Okay, so it can't be statement number 1 because this was to do with brain activity, so that was clearly Goldfarb. It can't be statement number 3 because that's implying that the control group were more significantly affected, so it had to be the middle statement where you're making this comparison of cognitive and intellectual functioning to a control group that didn't show those deficits. And then lastly, what can we conclude from Rutter's research? Can you think of anything to say here? Okay, so this was the additional point that I gave you, that the early effects of institutionalisation can be overcome with early sensitive, good parental care. And as long as the intervention is early enough, those children will recover. Okay, so now we're moving into the exam practice. So for year 13s, you've got these questions listed. I would recommend that you pause the video here and have a go at these 3 questions. So we've got the 2-mark question on the effects. We've got the question about anchor and advice for the parents, and then the effects on Luca, I believe it is. So year 13s, pause this at this point, have a go at the questions, and then you can come back and mark them up. Year 12s, you should have already done these questions as part of your DIL, so we're just going to mark these up. So for the first one, you get 1 mark for any 2 of the following. I would imagine that you have probably gone with low IQ and a disinhibited attachment, but you could get any of the ones listed there. All right, so give yourself a mark out of 2. If you haven't done it, then please make sure that that's completed for tomorrow when I return. Next question. This was about advising Anchor and his parents, rather, what to expect after adopting Anchor from one of these institutions. So you can see on the left-hand side, there's a list of things that you could have talked about. You don't need to talk about all of those. It's how much detail you have gone into. Now, just very quickly, it is a pure application question, so you don't get credit really for listing any effects. They all had to be in the context of Anchor. So Anchor may struggle at school and have delayed intellectual development or low IQ. He might not learn new behaviours quickly. He might not learn concepts as quickly. So you get credit for referring to that delayed developmental IQ. You might also get credit for talking about disinhibited attachment, but it had to be in the context of what Anchor would be doing. So therefore he would be acting inappropriately towards strangers in his class or towards strange teachers, for example. He might experience more temper tantrums due to the problems with his prefrontal cortex and his amygdala. So he might have emotional developmental problems as well. More general idea here, a lack of an internal working model, so he might not be able to interact with his peers adequately enough. He may also show signs of what we call quasi-autism, so problems in understanding social context. Again, that's all to do with the PFC. You could get credit for saying that the problems may not have been as severe if he was adopted before the age of 6 months, so he might recover more easily. And also, any of the effects can be reversed depending on how sensitive their parenting style is towards Anchor. So give yourself a mark out of 5 for your original answer, but then if in a different colour perhaps, or underneath, you might want to be adding stuff on here. I have looked over some of these responses from you on your DIL, and I do think that some of you need to build on this answer. So take a moment now to just build that answer up and add in anything that you think you were missing. For the Luca question, it was a lot of the similar content. So the mark scheme's not as detailed, but you can refer to any of those previous effects that we've had for Anchor there, or the mark scheme from the other question as well. Okay, so you get 1 mark for identifying an effect and then 1 mark for expanding on it with Luca. All right, so go ahead and mark that question up as well. Okay, so now that we've completed a little bit of exam practice, you want to get this sheet in front of you. Booklets should be closed at this point, please, for year 12s. And we're just going to have a little look over the evaluation content and try and get some points matched up. So you want to pause this video here for the moment. On the left hand side we've got identifications, in the middle we've got explains, and on the right hand side we've got conclusions. So take a good few moments now, see if you can match those up. Okay, So hopefully you've paused that for a good few minutes and had a go at the activity. So we're going to go ahead and point out what are the statements that go together. So we're going to start with the only positive, which is that there are real life applications. So one important thing that we learned from the Rutter study is that orphans need to be adopted at a very, very early age if they're to overcome the effects of institutionalisation, especially those children who are coming from those horrific orphanages in Romania. The early adoption is absolutely the way to go here. Most Romanian orphans now that are adopted, you can see, if you want to underline it, are adopted within the first few weeks of birth, because the research shows us that those adoptive mothers and children, if they're adopted nice and early, can go on and be as securely attached as what the non-adoptive families are. So this therefore means that Rutter's research findings have been really, really valuable and had an impact on adoption policy in trying to get children secured an adoptive place as early in their development as absolutely possible. However, there are issues with using the Rutter study as like a benchmark, because not all institutional care is to the same level or standard as the Rutter orphans, as what they experienced. So year 12s, there's a little space for you to add in some features of the Romanian orphanages. So they were really quite horrific. I did send you a video clip of them, but there was, often like 20 children, sometimes more in one room. They didn't really have anywhere to sleep. A lot of the eating facilities were located in the same place as what the sanitary facilities were. So potties were converted into tables, and they ate and went to the toilet in exactly the same place. They then weren't washing hands, so there was a lack of sanitation. There was raw feces a lot of the time, just spilling out into the play areas. So the conditions of the Romanian orphanages were really, really poor quality, which therefore means that you're going to struggle to generalise the findings out. So even though the information that we got from the Rutter study was highly important and highly valuable, you struggle to use that as a benchmark, because not all children's experiences of institutionalisation are as severe as what those children's were. Furthermore, Rutter claims that this was a longitudinal study allowing them to investigate the long-term effects of institutionalisation, but they only actually studied them up to the age of 15 years. Now, if you think how significantly a person changes post 15 years old, like I'm not the same person I was at 15, then this is a real kind of clear point to make. The thing that we're suggesting here is that by 15 they may not have caught up, but that isn't to say that into their adult life they may have gone on to, for want of a better phrase, better themselves, to overcome those early experiences of institutionalisation, and they could have gone on to achieve higher levels of IQ, higher levels of emotional functioning. So that therefore means that the long-term effects really aren't shown, because children may well have gone on and reversed the long-term effects of institutional care, and we wouldn't know that by only looking them up to the age of 15. And then the last point that we've got is that there are real issues in establishing cause and effect. Now, this is quite a complex point, so not everybody will use this one, I don't think. But because it wasn't a true experiment, like a lab experiment you would randomly allocate to your conditions, this was a natural experiment whereby the age of adoption acted as the independent variable or as the comparison. But what you've got to factor in is that there may have been a reason why some children stayed in the institution. So it may well have been that they already had emotional problems that therefore didn't make them suitable to being adopted, or not ideal candidates, as horrible as that sounds, not ideal candidates because they've got these emotional and cognitive problems whereby an adoptive parent wouldn't take that child out of the institution. So that may have caused them to stay in the institution longer, and that then would have had an impact on how severe the effects were for the child. But we can't purely say that their developmental effects were caused by the institution. They might have been in place beforehand, which meant that they weren't adopted. So like I say, that's quite a difficult point to make, but you're saying that there's no random allocation, and obviously those other developmental problems may have had a significant impact on those children. So year 12s, go back into your booklet now, highlight kind of the important parts of the evaluation. For your year 13s, pick which evaluation points you would like to use for your 16-mark essay. So pause this here and just have a good go at doing that for me. Okay, so we should have already completed that task if we've paused it sensibly for a few moments. I do just want to draw your attention to this additional question. I've not got a mark scheme for this one, but this is a question asking you about case study methodology. So I did say that they can throw up random bits of methodology for you here, so you've got to have a good understanding of all your methodology. So go ahead and answer that one as well. Just going to flip through these a second. Okay, and then bring you into the last task, which is obviously essay planning. The focus for the kind of revision countdown at the moment is developing key exam skills. And as I've already said to my year 13s, one core exam skill that I don't think students practice regularly enough is planning and preparing for 16-mark essays. So I would like all of you now on the table that I've provided you with, just to make a detailed plan of how you would go about answering this question. But please do bear in mind that there's no application available, so that therefore means that there are 10 marks of AO3, meaning that you need to be providing a minimum of 3 evaluation points. And if you're wanting to get kind of into B's, A's, A-star territory, they should be concluded to the best of your ability. If you're a C/D grade student, knock that down to 2 evaluation points, but please bear in mind that it should be quality over quantity. So what you pick to do should be done well. Rather than trying to do more evaluation points, do 2 that you're confident with, and that it will be more likely to attract you credit in that sense. So this is the first lesson, institutionalisation. The second session, once you've done this essay plan, is to do with the effects of early childhood on later attachment styles. Okay, so do your essay plan and then move on to that second video.